The dusty roadside diner stood as a solitary beacon of hospitality in an otherwise unremarkable stretch of highway, its old neon sign flickering with an electric hum that seemed almost alive as twilight spread across the sky. Despite its modest appearance, scuffed floors, aging booths with vinyl seats, and a worn countertop, there was something comforting about the place, as though it had quietly nourished generations of weary travelers without demanding anything in return. That evening, a soft summer breeze slipped in through the propped-open door and mingled with the aroma of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee. Anna, a kind-hearted waitress who had worked there for longer than she cared to admit, moved with practiced grace among the smattering of patrons. She balanced plates on her arms with ease, offering a friendly smile to each person who found their way inside. Her warm brown eyes exuded a calm efficiency that could settle even the most restless of wanderers. She wore a simple pale blue uniform with a small embroidered name badge over her heart, her neat ponytail swaying gently behind her as she made her rounds. That night, only a few local regulars occupied the booths, whispering amongst themselves about mundane happenings. A neighbor's broken fence, the persistent rumor of a traveling carnival that might pass through town come fall, and bits of talk concerning the uneasy quiet that had settled in recently. Anna's voice, measured and pleasant, provided a reassuring backdrop to these conversations. However, just before the clock struck, what most folks considered the dinner rush, if it could be called that in such a humble spot, the rhythmic roar of a motorcycle engine cut through the stillness outside. Within moments, the front door swung open, and in stomped a towering biker named Gage. He loomed like a thundercloud in a place meant for small pleasantries. Gage's imposing figure seemed to fill the entrance, and his every step made the floors tremble slightly. His arms, coated in tattoos, savage designs of snarling beasts and flaming skulls, announced him as a member of some local biker gang most people recognized only by hearsay. A leather vest covered his torso, embossed with a patch that showcased a skull and scythe emblem. The deep lines etched in his face hinted at a life accustomed to violence, and he scanned the room with a predatory glint in his eyes, as if searching for the slightest provocation. Conversation died as soon as he set foot inside. Anna, busy wiping down the counter, stole a glance in his direction. Nothing about Gage suggested he had arrived for a peaceful bite to eat. Menace practically seeped out of his pores. Still, Anna gathered her courage. She'd dealt with difficult customers before, and she knew all too well how easily bravado could escalate into chaos. For a few seconds, their eyes locked in an unspoken standoff. She reminded herself that the diner prided itself on serving everyone who came through, from families with kids to road-tripping couples to the rare truckers hauling loads at odd hours. She was determined that no one would walk away feeling threatened, not on her watch. Summoning her professional smile, Anna slid out from behind the counter and approached Gage with determined composure. The other patrons, mostly locals who recognized trouble when they saw it, tried their best to stay invisible, hunching over their coffees or half-eaten sandwiches. The quiet, already tense, intensified further as Gage lumbered to a nearby booth. The sharp screech of the seat under his weight echoed through the small diner like an omen of ill tidings. Anna paused a few feet away, instinct telling her to maintain a safe distance. "Evening," she said, forcing politeness into her tone. "Can I get you something, sir? Coffee, maybe?" Gage's stare remained fixed on the scarred tabletop in front of him, and his jaw worked slowly as if grinding up shards of glass. Instead of answering, he reached into an inner pocket of his vest and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. Anna's heart sank. She spotted the glowing no smoking sign displayed near the door, put there after repeated complaints about the lingering odor years ago. She knew the town's regulations well enough to feel certain that Gage was about to challenge her. Sure enough, he slid a cigarette between his lips and, with an almost theatrical motion, struck a match on the side of the table. The flame illuminated his coarse features. Taking a slow drag, Gage exhaled a blue plume of smoke that hung in the air like a warning signal. Anna's eyes stung, and she drew a breath, hoping her voice would remain steady. "I'm sorry, sir," she tried, leveling her tone. "I have to ask you not to smoke inside. Could you please put that out?" The silence deepened. Gage tilted his head, assessing her in that fraction of a moment. Then, with deliberate contempt, he flicked the growing ash from his cigarette, scattering it onto the clean tile floor. The utter disregard for simple courtesy sent a ripple of tension through the diner. An older man seated at the counter shifted uncomfortably on his stool but said nothing. Another customer, a timid young mother, busied herself wiping ketchup off her toddler's face, pretending not to see. It was Anna alone who stood her ground, unwavering. "You heard me," she repeated, swallowing the lump of dread in her throat. "No smoking inside." The biker's lips curled into a sneer, and those few words were apparently all he needed to justify what happened next. With lightning speed, Gage seized her wrist, twisting it cruelly. A gasp escaped her as she felt a shot of pain radiate up her arm. In the suffocating hush, every eye in the diner locked onto them. A hush so thick it felt like the world had stopped. Anna let out a short cry, and Gage leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. "Girl," he growled, "I'll do what I want. And you," he tugged her, causing her to stumble, "are going to learn a lesson about picking fights you can't finish." Anna tried to wrench her arm free, heart pounding in her chest, but Gage's grip was iron. The suddenness of his attack had rattled her. She'd never been manhandled this way, and the pain was enough to send adrenaline surging through her veins. Fear and outrage mingled within her, but she did her best to maintain her composure. With a tremor in her voice, she managed, "Let go of me. Now." She glanced around, searching for help. The other diners looked stricken, torn between self-preservation and the innate decency that told them this had already gone too far. A few of them opened their mouths as if to protest, but snapped them shut just as quickly. Gage, catching the flicker of moral conflict in the room, rewarded it with a low, contemptuous chuckle. In that taut moment, the faint jingle of the diner's doorbell cut through the tension like a clarion call. A figure stood in the threshold, a tall silhouette against the backdrop of the setting sun. Dwayne Johnson stepped inside with an air that practically electrified the atmosphere, as though the molecules in the room rearranged themselves to accommodate him. His shoulders were broad, his posture confident, yet not puffed up with arrogance. A warmth in his dark eyes contrasted with the faint scowl across his strong features, revealing a man who was clearly capable of formidable strength, but who wore it quietly, until pushed. Dressed in a simple t-shirt that did nothing to hide his robust physique, Dwayne moved with an understated ease. He had the aura of someone who had faced adversity before, who knew precisely how to respond when confronted with bullies. Although nobody recognized him as a local, his mere presence radiated a calm surety. At first, he simply observed the scene. Anna pinned painfully, Gage's sneering face turned in challenge, and the silent terror gripping the onlookers. Then, gently, Dwayne pushed the door shut behind him and advanced another step. "Mind letting her go?" he said, his voice resonating low and clear in the hush. The lines of tension in his neck suggested that, despite his measured tone, he was prepared to escalate if he had to. Gage snorted, unwilling to loosen his hold. "Who are you to tell me anything?" he shot back. "This woman's been running her mouth like she owns this dump. She needs to be put in her place." Dwayne's brow furrowed, and his gaze flicked to Anna. He offered her a reassuring nod, as if to say, "It's going to be okay." Then, in a deceptively soft tone that reverberated with a quiet menace, he repeated, "Let her go." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Gage didn't move, and Anna's breath caught in her throat. Then Gage scoffed, baring his teeth in a feral grin. He flung Anna aside, sending her stumbling against a table, where she managed to catch herself before falling. The blow to her dignity was as jarring as the physical pain. Dwayne's eyes narrowed, and around them, the other patrons found their own hearts racing, half in fear, half in anticipation. Anna, shoulders trembling, stepped away to a safe distance, rubbing her sore wrist. She could barely believe how quickly the fragile calm of the diner had shattered. Her thoughts spun, uncertain whether she should thank Dwayne for intervening or rush to call the authorities, though she suspected even the local police might hesitate to tangle with a biker like Gage. Dwayne leveled his gaze at the towering biker. He was clearly no stranger to confrontation. Each carefully measured step he took in Gage's direction carried a silent promise: stop now, or face the consequences. Gage, however, showed no sign of bowing to intimidation. Whether fueled by adrenaline or ego, he opted to push matters, hooking his thumbs into his vest pockets and blocking Dwayne's path, chest puffed out in defiance. The tension crackled between them like static before a storm. Gage lunged first, swinging a heavy fist toward Dwayne's ribs. Yet Dwayne moved with practiced agility, sidestepping the blow. In the same fluid motion, he brought his arm up and delivered a solid strike to Gage's torso. The resulting thud echoed across the diner, accompanied by Gage's startled grunt. The biker staggered backward, coughing as the wind left him. Disbelief flickered in his eyes. Perhaps he wasn't used to meeting someone with equal, let alone superior, power. Recovering with a snarl, Gage reached for a nearby stool. He hefted it overhead and swung it down in a reckless arc aimed at Dwayne's shoulders. Quick as lightning, Dwayne raised both arms, catching the stool before it connected. A brief contest of strength followed, as Gage tried to drive the stool downward while Dwayne resisted, arms tensing as if molded from steel. Finally, with a sharp pivot, Dwayne twisted the stool sideways, causing Gage to lose his grip. The stool clattered to the floor, leaving Gage momentarily off balance and vulnerable. Sensing the opening, Dwayne pressed forward. He unleashed a flurry of blows, each strike methodical, each step purposeful. Though Gage attempted to dodge, there was a certain precision in Dwayne's movements that couldn't be overcome by raw aggression alone. A fierce uppercut sent Gage reeling, staggering near the entrance before slumping against the wall, jaw slack and chest heaving. The entire altercation had taken only moments, but it felt elongated by the sheer tension as every onlooker watched in rapt astonishment. Anna tried to breathe through her shock. Around her, the diner remained quiet, as though the confrontation had stripped the place of its usual comforting hum. Plates sat abandoned on tables, the customers' minds far from their fries and coffee. This was no casual bar fight. Many recognized the undercurrent of genuine threat in Gage, who was known in the area for stirring up trouble with his gang. And now, out of nowhere, this newcomer, Dwayne, had flattened him with staggering efficiency. Standing near the wall, Gage coughed and spat blood onto the faded linoleum, his face contorted in hatred. The bitter sting of humiliation was written all over him. His large hands clenched into trembling fists as he tried to steady himself. With a glance around, he realized that not a soul was on his side. Every witness regarded him with either disgust or fear. Wiping sweat from his forehead, he forced himself upright, leaning heavily against the nearest booth. Dwayne observed him calmly, fists still raised, ready to respond if the biker tried anything else. In that poised stance, he radiated a guarded confidence, alert for the next threat yet composed, as though violence was an unwelcome but familiar domain for him. Nearby, Anna stood rubbing her wrist, an uneasy mixture of relief and lingering apprehension filling her gaze. It was Gage who broke the tense silence, his words laced with venom. "You think this is over, hotshot?" he snarled. A trickle of blood trailing down his chin underscored his battered state, but his pride propelled him to keep talking. "You don't know who you're messing with." A faint flicker of a smirk touched Dwayne's lips, almost imperceptible. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he replied softly. "Someone who thinks he can do whatever he wants just because he's big and mean." Then his voice hardened, each word cutting like steel. "But that doesn't fly in here." Without warning, Gage lunged again, fueled by desperation. He aimed a wild punch at Dwayne's temple, but Dwayne deflected it, hooking Gage's arm and twisting until the biker hissed in pain. A well-placed kick to the back of Gage's knee brought him crashing down, forcing him to kneel awkwardly. Dwayne's forearm pressed into Gage's shoulder blade, holding him fast. "Stop!" Anna exclaimed, eyes wide. She feared for her diner's safety, for the people who had come here for a simple meal. The entire place threatened to turn into a battleground, but she couldn't deny the small jolt of satisfaction at seeing Gage subdued. That satisfaction was laced with guilt. She'd always prided herself on trying to handle situations peacefully, but Gage's cruelty had left no room for diplomacy. Dwayne released Gage with a shove, sending him sprawling onto the floor. For a second or two, Gage lay there, panting, eyes darting from side to side, as if unsure whether to lash out again. Ultimately, the realization that he was outmatched proved too strong to ignore. Staggering to his feet, he swayed, each breath labored. Dwayne watched as Gage hobbled toward the door, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The defeated biker paused only to mutter a few incoherent threats under his breath. Then he shoved the door open and stumbled out into the warm night. Relief washed over the room like a wave. Conversations erupted in hushed tones, and a few people dared to turn their focus back to half-eaten meals or refills of their drinks. Anna exhaled, sagging against the counter. "Thank you," she managed, turning grateful eyes upon Dwayne. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. Her voice trailed off, but the tremor in her shoulders conveyed exactly how shaken she felt. Dwayne dipped his head in acknowledgement, the tension in his posture slowly easing. With the immediate threat gone, the reality of what had just transpired seemed to weigh upon everyone in the diner. A couple in the corner booth resumed chewing their dinner in stunned silence, while a heavy-set man perched at the counter gave Dwayne a shaky salute of approval. Anna moved to the kitchen pass, grabbed a towel, and dabbed at her neck and wrists, still trying to compose herself. She marveled at how quickly fate could shift. One moment, she was going about her routine, and the next, she'd nearly been assaulted in a place that was practically her second home. The night pressed on, and Dwayne settled into a booth, refusing any offers of free food or coffee despite Anna's insistence. He was polite but reserved, seeming to prefer anonymity. As the minutes ticked by, normalcy began to return in hesitant increments. The overhead fans whirred softly, the grill hissed in the background, and the smell of fried eggs mingled with the faint stench of cigarette smoke Gage had left behind. Anna even managed to crack a smile at a corny joke an older patron made to break the ice. But beneath the diner's forced calm, an undercurrent of tension persisted. Anna found her gaze drifting to the door every time a new customer arrived, as if half expecting Gage to burst back in with a vendetta on his tongue. Despite her attempts to quell her worries, she couldn't shake the sense of pending repercussion. Bikers like Gage rarely operated alone, and the patch on his vest likely connected him to a group. She'd heard stories of entire gangs rolling into town to take vengeance on whoever had bested one of their own. Dwayne seemed aware of this possibility too. In the dim overhead lighting, she could see him scanning the windows as if searching for silhouettes in the night. He nursed a small cup of black coffee that Anna had set down for him, not even adding sugar. His focus, unwavering and steady, suggested to her that he knew he might soon be called upon to defend the diner, or perhaps himself, again. Anna found it strangely comforting to have someone so capable nearby, though she worried it might place him in greater danger. When midnight neared and the number of customers dwindled, Dwayne stood up. His broad shoulders cast a long shadow across the tile floor. Reaching into his pocket, he set down a few bills, more than enough to cover any coffee he'd consumed. Anna tried to protest. He had practically saved her from a potential assault after all, but Dwayne just shook his head. "Thanks, but I think it's time I head out," he said quietly. "Get some rest. If trouble comes back, you call the police first, then me." Anna's cheeks warmed, gratitude mixing with a hint of admiration for this stranger who had risked so much. She quickly scribbled down the diner's phone number on a scrap of receipt paper and handed it to him with a trembling hand. Stepping outside, Dwayne inhaled a lungful of night air. Stars glimmered overhead, and the old gas station across the road stood silent, its pumps illuminated by a couple of flickering fluorescent bulbs. The faint, steady chirp of crickets wove a backdrop that seemed incongruous with the violence that had nearly consumed the diner not too long ago. Just before departing, Dwayne turned back to see Anna leaning in the doorway, looking both relieved and uneasy. He raised a hand in a gentle wave, indicating a temporary farewell. By the time dawn arrived, Gage's humiliating defeat at the diner had already buzzed through the local grapevine, spreading like wildfire across a small-town rumor mill. Word was that a massive stranger had flung Gage around like a rag doll. While many who heard the story felt a surge of relief, few had sympathy for a thug like Gage. There were also hushed whispers of retribution. Gage had never been subtle about belonging to a motorcycle club that called themselves the Black Blades, a group reputed for shaking down smaller bars and convenience stores. Under normal circumstances, these bikers roamed the highways searching for easy marks, reveling in intimidation tactics and petty violence. Their existence was an open secret among the more cautious residents, who avoided the group whenever possible. True to form, Gage did not limp off to nurse his wounds in solitude. Nursing bruised ribs and even more bruised pride, he rode straight to the outskirts of the county where his associates tended to congregate in a rundown auto garage. It was hardly a sophisticated hideout, but it served their needs. A roof overhead for beer-fueled gatherings, enough space for their bikes, and a wide array of old parts that could be fashioned into improvised weapons if necessary. Still seething from the memory of Dwayne's effortless takedown, Gage wasted no time embellishing the tale for his fellow Black Blades. He described Dwayne in monstrous terms, a mountain of a man with fists like sledgehammers who had ambushed him. It hardly mattered that the real story was far simpler. Gage started trouble, and Dwayne finished it. The only point Gage cared to convey was that the humiliation he suffered demanded payback. Word reached the de facto leader of the Black Blades, a massive brute named Magnus, whose thick beard and heavily muscled arms made him a near caricature of a menacing outlaw. Scarred knuckles bore testament to countless beatings he'd dished out or received, and his cold eyes revealed no spark of empathy for those on the receiving end of his fury. Upon hearing Gage's story, Magnus merely grunted, his expression darkening. "So some drifter decided to play hero," Magnus muttered, already picturing how to handle it. "Nobody beats down one of my men and walks away. We'll pay that diner a little visit. Let everyone know we don't take kindly to interference." The younger members of the gang, eager for any excuse to prove themselves, rallied around the idea. They sharpened knives, tested chains, checked baseball bats for cracks, every means of intimidation they could muster. Standing among them, Gage nursed his battered ego, with each clang of metal, itching for a confrontation that would let him reclaim his pride. Back at the diner, Anna worked the next afternoon with a forced smile, dutifully refilling coffee cups and serving up plates of eggs and bacon. She kept one eye always turned toward the windows, half expecting the sudden roar of motorcycles. Anxiety coiled in her chest, making each breath feel labored. Word had traveled fast about the beating Gage took, and it seemed inevitable that his allies would come for retribution. Aware of that possibility, a few regulars had chosen to stay away, fearing they might be caught in the crossfire if the Black Blades rolled in. Despite the lowered foot traffic, Anna found her nerves on edge, especially when any stranger entered. Each time, her heart pounded until she realized it was just a trucker or a traveling couple. So intense was her focus on the door that she nearly dropped a tray when Dwayne quietly walked in. Relief flooded her, and she felt an odd mixture of gratitude and worry. He caught her expression and gave a small nod as he took a seat at the counter. "You don't have to be here," Anna said softly, leaning over to speak so other patrons couldn't eavesdrop. "The last thing I want is for you to be in danger because of me, or this place." Dwayne glanced around, noticing the hush in the diner. Fewer customers, fewer conversations. The tension gripped the air like a vice. "Don't worry about me," he replied in a reassuring tone. "I wasn't going to run off knowing a gang might show up." He paused, looking at her with genuine concern. "Are you okay?" Her lips twitched in a weary half-smile. "I'm managing. Just wish none of this had happened. This diner's always been my safe place." "You ever think of closing up early?" Dwayne asked. "At least until things cool down?" Anna shook her head. "I thought about it, but we have folks who rely on this place. Besides, closing early only shows them we're afraid. That's not how I want to live." Her eyes darted around the room. "But I won't lie, I'm scared." He offered the faintest of smiles. "Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs to be done anyway." His words settled over her like a comforting blanket. In the back of her mind, she recalled how effortlessly he had subdued Gage, how he remained calm even when fists were flying. If anyone could help protect the diner, it was this stranger. Still, she knew better than to place all her hope on one man, no matter how capable. Dwayne asked for a simple meal, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. As Anna disappeared into the kitchen to ready his plate, an unsettling rumble echoed from outside, like a far-off thunder that made the windows vibrate. Another patron, a retired teacher in her 60s, glanced through the blinds, her face draining of color. "Anna," she whispered, her voice tight, "you'd better see this." Anna hurried back into the dining area, meeting Dwayne's stern gaze as he rose from his stool. Together they peered through the smudged glass to see a row of motorcycles emerging over the slight hill on the horizon. There were many, too many to be a coincidence. The roar of the bikes grew steadily louder, rattling the diner's nerves and sending an undercurrent of dread rippling through the building. Moments later, the gang of Black Blades slid to a stop in a makeshift formation just outside. Their arrival seemed orchestrated to strike fear, a coordinated flourish of engines revving and abrupt silence as they killed the motors all at once. Anna's pulse thundered in her ears as she spotted Gage among them, his lips still swollen, looking enraged. But leading the pack was Magnus, a head taller than most of his men, with a presence that radiated unbridled aggression. He swung off his bike, letting it rest on its kickstand, and raked the exterior of the diner with a cold, assessing gaze. knuckles whitened on the grips of chains and bats. A sense of dreadful anticipation swelled, as though the very air might split from the tension. Inside, a handful of customers froze in place. One or two rushed to settle their tabs, apparently hoping to slip out the back door. Anna, however, felt glued to the spot behind the counter. She pressed a shaky hand to her chest, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Amid the swirling fear, she found herself looking to Dwayne, whose expression remained calm, eyes steeled with resolve. Without hesitation, Dwayne crossed to the door and flipped the lock. "Anna, get anyone who can't handle this into the kitchen," he said quietly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "They'll be safer away from the windows. Then call the police." She nodded, her voice failing her, and hastily guided the trembling customers toward the kitchen. The retired teacher, the young trucker, and a couple who had been arguing over the check moments before quickly complied. Anna grabbed the phone off the wall, fumbling through the dial. She prayed the local cops wouldn't delay, but deep down, she dreaded that by the time they arrived, any damage would already be done. Outside, Magnus signaled to his men, and a few advanced, pressing their faces against the glass. One of them banged on the locked door with a gloved hand, his muffled curses leaking through the barrier. Another peered through the window with a leering grin, tapping the point of a large hunting knife on the glass as if threatening to carve his way in. Dwayne stood still, arms loose at his sides, poised but not tense. He met each hostile glare with unflinching resolve. For a moment, Anna glimpsed him silhouetted by the light from the overhead bulbs, his frame seemingly larger than life. It occurred to her that maybe that's exactly how he seemed to Gage when they fought, a man who didn't know the meaning of backing down. With the squeal of metal, one of the bikers pried at the door handle. The locked entrance rattled. Magnus stepped forward, impatience tightening his features. "Open up!" he barked, his voice a guttural roar. "We're just here for a chat, and we'd prefer not to break your pretty little diner." For a moment, Dwayne didn't respond. Then, exhaling through his nose, he pivoted and unlatched the door with deliberate coolness, stepping aside as if issuing an invitation. The door swung wide, and the black blades poured in. Chains rattled ominously. Boots struck the tile floor with thudding force, and tension stretched taut as a wire. A few of the bikers took up positions near the windows, effectively boxing Dwayne in. Magnus, flanked by Gage, strode to the center of the diner. He aimed a hard stare at Dwayne, sized him up, and released a derisive snort. "This the one who broke my guy's face?" Magnus asked, motioning casually toward Gage's bruises. "He doesn't look like much." Gage spat on the floor, anger shining in his eyes. "He's tougher than he looks, boss," he said through clenched teeth. "But I owe him a payback all the same." Magnus nodded, then shifted his attention to Dwayne. "So you think it's fun, roughing up my men? Or maybe you just like playing hero. Either way, you made a mistake." As the silent standoff lengthened, Anna hovered near the kitchen doorway, her fingers anxiously clutched around the phone. She'd already placed a frantic call to the sheriff's office, but no sirens blared yet. Dwayne, his tone measured, answered Magnus. "Your man attacked a waitress. I stopped him." "Oh, so that's the story Gage left out," Magnus said, throwing a sharp look at his subordinate. Gage coughed, looking momentarily sheepish, but stood firm in his anger. "Well, big guy, the rest of us don't appreciate you sending him back in pieces." Dwayne's stance remained steady, though his mind likely churned with the reality of being outnumbered at least 8-1. "Nobody asked him to start trouble," he replied evenly. "But I'm here now. If you came looking for a fight, I'll give you one." That final statement acted like a spark in a dry forest. One of the bikers lashed out first, hurling a bar stool across the diner in a clattering arc. Dwayne ducked it, springing toward the attacker with coiled power. He caught the biker's extended arm, twisted it violently behind the man's back, and drove him forward into a nearby booth. The wooden frame cracked under the impact. The diner exploded into chaos. Gage lunged, brandishing a chain, eyes burning with the promise of revenge. He whipped the chain in a brutal swing, but Dwayne sidestepped again, hooking Gage's wrist and yanking him off balance. The chain clanged to the floor as Gage stumbled, and Dwayne brought his elbow down on the back of Gage's neck. The biker dropped, stunned and gasping for air. Another biker approached with a baseball bat, aiming a downward strike. Dwayne pivoted, blocking with his forearm. Pain jolted up his arm, but he countered by seizing the bat. With a powerful yank, he disarmed the biker, then slammed the tip of the bat into the man's gut. Doubling over, the biker let out a choked groan. In the midst of it all, Magnus remained rooted, eyes surveying the scene, making mental calculations. His lips curled into a thin smile, as though he relished watching his men test the limits of Dwayne's endurance. Two more of the black blades converged from opposite sides. One carried a heavy chain with spiked links, the other wielded a knife. For a split second, Dwayne looked cornered. Yet even against these odds, a focused calm enveloped Dwayne. Without any hesitation, he feinted to his left, drawing the spiked chain biker's attention away from the knife wielder. The chain whistled through the air in a wide arc, but Dwayne darted beneath it at the last possible second, slamming his shoulder into the biker's midsection. Fueled by muscle and momentum, the collision felt like a small explosion. The biker coughed violently, collapsing to his knees. Seizing the chain in a single swift motion, Dwayne jerked it away and flung it aside, sending the heavy link skittering across the linoleum. The second attacker, brandishing the knife, sensed his moment to strike. He lunged for Dwayne's flank, blade aimed dangerously close to vital organs. Anna let out a startled cry from across the diner, and time seemed to decelerate. With a lightning-fast reflex, Dwayne pivoted, his hand slapping down on the assailant's wrist just as the knife neared its target. Twisting the biker's arm outward, Dwayne used the man's own momentum against him, forcing him off balance. The biker grunted in pain, fingers splaying open, and the knife clattered uselessly onto the floor. A brutal knee to the chest put the man out of the fight, sending him sprawling among the broken glass and toppled furniture. Now, only Magnus and a single other gang member remained upright in the midst of the carnage. Chairs lay upended, shards of shattered dinnerware glittered under the fluorescent lights, and the moans of the wounded or dazed bikers formed a grim chorus. The battered diner seemed a world away from the peaceful haven it had been just the night before. Outside, the hiss of distant tires hinted that maybe the sheriff's office was finally responding, but Anna wasn't sure if help would arrive in time. Magnus stepped forward, rolling his thick neck until it cracked, tension vibrating in every line of his colossal frame. "Enough warm-up," he said, voice hoarse with controlled fury. His large fists clenched and unclenched, and his posture radiated an almost feral eagerness. This was a man who relished the brutality of direct confrontation. Dwayne, breathing a bit harder now, wiped sweat from his brow. He prepared himself mentally for what he suspected might be the toughest brawl of the night. Only a fool would underestimate a man like Magnus. Anna watched from her vantage behind the counter, pulse hammering in her chest, praying that the police or any form of backup would burst in at the last second. But she also sensed that Dwayne wasn't the type to place his fate in anybody else's hands. Magnus lunged first, an explosion of muscle and rage. His fist came in low, aiming for Dwayne's midsection, with enough force to knock the wind out of him. Dwayne twisted at the waist, absorbing the blow partially on his side, and returned a punch that connected with Magnus's jaw in a sharp crack. It was like hitting solid stone. Magnus stumbled but did not fall. Instead, he reeled back, a hungry gleam in his eye, and swung again, attempting a heavy hook aimed at Dwayne's temple. Ducking, Dwayne avoided the worst of the impact, yet Magnus's fist clipped his shoulder, pain ricocheting through the joint. Gritting his teeth, Dwayne retaliated with a vicious combo, a jab to the ribs, followed by a cross to the face. The strikes made Magnus grunt and stagger, but he stayed upright, chest heaving as adrenaline coursed through him. For a few seconds, the two circled one another, trading blows, Magnus's raw, brute force against Dwayne's precision and experience. Neither would surrender easily. At the edges of his vision, Dwayne saw the last unoccupied biker creeping toward him, a lead pipe raised. Swiftly, Dwayne feinted left, causing Magnus to shift position, and then pivoted on his heel to confront the pipe wielder. One well-timed kick sent the pipe flying out of the man's hands, and a second strike, a powerful roundhouse, connected with the biker's torso, driving him hard into a booth. He slumped, dazed, leaving only Magnus standing. Rage twisted across Magnus's face as he seized the opportunity to tackle Dwayne from behind. Both men crashed onto a nearby table, splitting it under their combined weight. Anna let out a choked gasp, certain something terrible had happened. But from within that cloud of splinters and dust, Dwayne emerged on top, pinning Magnus with an elbow against his throat. The biker leader's hands flailed, grappling for leverage. Dwayne pressed down, using his weight advantage to keep Magnus pinned. "Listen," Dwayne growled, voice taut with effort. You and your crew come around here again, and it won't be a broken table next time. He punctuated the threat by driving his forearm a bit deeper, just enough to make Magnus wheeze. Then he let go, shoving the colossal man aside. Magnus coughed violently. The wind knocked out of him, but the fight had drained from his eyes. Dwayne stood, chest rising and falling with each labored breath, surveying the aftermath. Some bikers lay groaning, others knelt trying to catch their breath. Magnus hauled himself off the floor in a slow, deliberate motion, wiping a trail of blood from his lip. In the silence that followed, he glared at Dwayne with a hatred that promised long memories and grudges. Yet, even he knew they were badly beaten tonight. Outside, the sound of sirens grew louder, this time unmistakable. Flashing lights appeared through the diner windows, reflecting off the broken fragments of plates and cups. The cavalry had arrived, albeit late. Magnus spat on the ground, locked eyes with Dwayne, and muttered, "This isn't finished." But Dwayne returned the glare calmly, stance unwavering, letting the moment speak for itself. At that, Magnus gestured for his men to grab their wounded and go. The battered, resentful group of Black Blades staggered through the door, bent on escape before law enforcement could pin them down. Even Gage limped away, though not without a last backward glance, hateful and wary in equal measure. Within minutes, uniformed officers burst into the diner, weapons drawn, and expressions shocked by the state of destruction. Anna rushed to meet them, relief etched across her face. Gesturing to the devastation, she directed them to the fleeing bikers. When she turned back, she found Dwayne leaning against what remained of the counter, a mixture of exhaustion and determination in his gaze. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The events of the night had said enough. Eventually, as the police began taking statements, Anna placed a hesitant hand on Dwayne's arm. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you weren't here." He managed a tired smile, wincing at a bruise forming on his shoulder. "Some men just can't be reasoned with. But you stand up to a bully, and they learn they're not invincible." Anna guided him away from the wreckage so the paramedics could check his injuries. Despite everything, her diner in shambles, the specter of future reprisals, she held on to a sense of profound gratitude. Dwayne Johnson had proven that even in a dark world, good people existed who would fight to protect the innocent. And though the Black Blades might still pose a threat down the road, Anna felt a renewed spark of courage inside her. She had witnessed true resilience tonight, a powerful reminder that sometimes, when you meet someone who refuses to be intimidated by cruelty, even the fiercest gang can be forced to back down. As dawn approached, the diner lights flickered, matching the unsteady energy that coursed through Anna's mind. She knew she had a long road ahead, repairs to make, nightmares to quell, and a new awareness that violence could erupt at any moment. But standing there with Dwayne by her side, hearing the wail of sirens fade into the distance, she allowed herself a brief, hopeful thought. Bullies might return. They might threaten her peace and the sanctuary she'd created, but they would never find her cowering again. And that, in the end, might be the truest victory of all.